Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, whatever part of the world you're currently listening to our podcast. My name is Mina with the Face Economics podcast and Face Economics TV video blog. Today is February the 17th, 2025. It's getting late in the evening here where I'm at. So I'm just going to try to make this podcast short. I've been actually doing my podcast back to back this week. It seems like there's tons of news out there, and uh, you know, obviously, uh, people simply might not be able to, consume all the news that's happening around the world. And I figured I go ahead and kind of, you know, uh, synthesize some of the things that's happening, specifically in Europe with the current crisis in Ukraine. But I want to kind of point out that um, there was this saying during World War II when a soldier was to be sent out overseas, and if the family haven't heard back, would be good news. No news is good news for the family of those soldiers that are deployed abroad. Unfortunately, there's tons of news going on in today's world, so that in itself is a very troubling predicament to be in, especially in the year 2025. You know, if there should be any news, it should be news of growth, improvement, progress, news of jubilee, news of peace, news about you know how the humanity is actually moving forward. But unfortunately, the news that are happening nowadays are all news that reflect, our overall, um, you know, how would I put this, shortcomings as humans, as people that should have been, more evolved, more educated, and more wiser than, past generations. But it seems like, nothing's improving, specifically when people that grew up, back in the old days are continuously trying to revisit those times that they were growing up and try to implement them in today's reality, in today's world. So, as most of you are aware of, if you follow the news, was this convention in Munich just a few days ago, where various, government officials and representatives, military attaches, and some of the big wigs of Europe participated. They talk about the issues from artificial intelligence to the current state of affairs with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and obviously this quagmire with Ukraine and Russia. What I find it just extremely troubling is what I still don't see any form of you know consensus within the Europeans to want to escalate this situation between Russia and Ukraine. Seems like they're trying to fan the flame, um, and it's so unproductive, folks. On top of that, just today, there was an emergency meeting that President Macron had commenced in Paris, inviting less than a dozen member country representative out of the 27 European Union member countries to participate in an emergency security summit in Paris, even though they've just had a conference in Munich, Germany, a few days ago. So again, things are not improving. It seems as if the world is moving 1 foot forward and 6 foot backwards. Okay. Uh, it's so counterproductive, folks. And most of this is basically um, the what was due to the fact that Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin are scheduled to meet in Saudi Arabia to talk about de-escalating the war and eventually, ending the war in Ukraine. And yes, they decided not to invite the Ukrainians, and yes, they decided not to invite the European Union, member countries or representatives, simply for the fact that because they were the ones that was basically promoting and advising Ukraine to continue to fight on and continue to basically um, go against, the wisdom of the escalation and the wisdom of peace. So I thought I'd point this out there and let you all think about the overall pre-existing condition because it's so counterproductive at this point in the game. You know, I mean, imagine all the lives that have been disrupted, snuffed out, generations of people basically um, will never be able to, um, you know, relive those times that people in Ukraine weren't able to live a normal life. Imagine all the missed opportunities, all the, you know, significant advancement in the human conditions basically have just kind of disappeared because of this war. Okay, folks. So I just kind of want to reflect on what's currently going on. Um, let's try to think above and beyond the pre-existing mindset and worldview of people of the past. Okay, folks, we should be agents of peace today. We should be advocates of diplomacy and improving situation of the world via modern tools that we now possess in our fingertips. But instead, there are people that grew up, back in the days when the only thing that they know was to, you know, inflict harm, inflict damage on other people in order for them to feel as if they're superior. Really counterproductive. And I started doing my podcast earlier today, and then I ended up having to redo it because I kind of gotten disrupted by what was going on outside. But I just wanted to kind of reflect on the basic tenets of the convention that took place in Munich. Um, and this current situation with the emergency meeting in Paris that Mr. Macron, who's been advocating for the longest time to get Ukraine into the NATO, institution to become a member state, which what he failed to realize is that there has to be a consensus and there has to be some sort of an order into an ascending into the NATO institution. And yet, Mr. Macron is now calling for an automatic, automatic membership into NATO without the blessing of the other NATO member countries. So I find that extremely strange, given that, there's been already talks as far as what Ukraine has to do and kind of become in order for the country to be allowed into the community, the NATO membership. And unfortunately, some people are pretty much still stuck in the past. They're creating this boogeyman of a character, which is in their head, they think the Russians wants to attack NATO member countries. That the Russians wants to attack, Europe in general. which is farthest from the truth. Russia is a modern society today. They have the means to live a perfectly, good life the way that they want it to be for themselves. There's no need for them to attack. There's no need for them to engage in a war conflict. Matter of fact, a couple of weeks after they managed to enter Ukraine, even though they were already in the territories that joined the Russian Federation back in 2014, the referendum territories, they were already, positioned in those territories. Uh, they decided to give Ukraine, a heads up. They gave them a warning back in 2021. And all this that I'm telling you now is surfacing now that there's more transparency in world news and via social media. Before, all these contents were being silenced, specifically in the West, and most national news organization wouldn't cover this information. But basically, back in 2021, um, there was already an ongoing attack, but it wasn't happening from the Russian side. It was happening from the Ukrainian authorities that decided to engage those referendum states that basically sided with the Russians. They had a vote, they had their election, and they wanted to be a part of the Russian Federation and territory. So eventually they became Russian, territories and flew Russian flags. Uh, that took place in 2021 when people from Ukraine basically decided to go ahead and engage those um, referendum states. And the Russians basically put their military in those referendum states and told the Ukrainians that they need to stop and, they need to leave those states that sided with the Russians in peace and not disrupt their communities and way of life. But yet that didn't stop. This started in 2021, okay? Not up until in 2022, February 2022, did the Russians actually march into Ukrainian territory. Okay, but they did give them months in advance of warning to stop and escalate the situation. But fortunately, that didn't happen. Okay, folks. And now, what I'm telling you today is actually spread all over the world news-wise. People are constantly talking about this situation issue that I'm telling you now. So I'm not the first one to basically share this information. It's now global news. It's now world news. It's common knowledge. Um, but during the Biden-Harris administration and the onset of the war, none of this was being made public. Okay, but luckily we have a new administration in the White House, and they are allowing these kinds of information to surface. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Trump administration continued to allow, silenced information from the, state dating all the way back to 2021 to surface. I think that's going to be, the name of today's reality: exposure, expose. Many of the, sketchy things and evil, nefarious, corrupt things that took place during the Biden-Harris administration. I think that's going to be a payback for all those, miscalculations that took place regarding Ukraine. And unfortunately, many countries in the West, especially in Europe, will be exposed, and some of them are already feeling, the ramifications of their actions. Basically, some of these leaders from the West are now being voted out of office or bowing out or are losing confidence within their public. So it's a new day, and not a new world, but a new day, definitely. And I hope that things will improve further. And I think once the war in Ukraine ends, things will return to normalcy. Even though there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting, reinvestment and restructuring of many of these countries in Europe, and basically redevelopment of Ukraine. So, with that said, folks, my name is Mina, economics concept author, which is the utilization of the social media platform in economic development worldwide, since politics and geopolitics and all these market condition is associated and interconnected, that are also shared on social media. I figure I cover these kinds of topics. And not just that, it's, I tend to talk about a mixed bag of topics. I just wanted to kind of reemphasize that the world is paying attention to Europe. It's definitely wondering, the world is wondering what's going to happen with Ukraine, and in many ways, the longer this conflict continues on, the more information the worlds are getting pertaining to the war and what precipitated the war, who's behind certain, um, miscalculations and lies and, corrupt agendas. So all of this are now surfacing. And yes, folks, they're being shared on social media. Okay. And that's just today's reality. So with this said, I thought I'd make this podcast short for this evening. I'm not sure if I'm gonna do another one tomorrow. If I do, then I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and we'll discuss what's happening around the world uh, on our next podcast. Okay, take care. Have a good night. Bye bye.